Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on Node.js on IBM. This is the second webinar we've done in this series, so we're glad to have you back. Today, we're going to be covering setting up your development tools, and our speaker today is going to be Brian May. In addition to being our Director of Customer Solutions here at Profound Logic, Brian's also a prolific speaker and writer out in the IBM community. Many of you have probably heard of him before, so we're excited to have him giving this presentation today. Now, before we get started, I did want to cover a few housekeeping things. So we are recording today's webinar, so you will receive a link to this recording once it's available. We will also have a post-webinar survey. So when you close out the webinar today, you'll be prompted to take a survey, and we'd really like for you to do this because this will help us continue to improve our webinars as time goes on. You can also ask questions to our team throughout this webinar. We will have a Q&A session or section at the end of this presentation, but we also have our team on board today, and so you can just use the question section of the GoToWebinar interface, and our team will answer your questions throughout the presentation. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand things over to Brian.
Thanks, Amanda, and thank you everyone for joining our webinar today. So we're going to spend a good bit of time today on a lot of different topics. It's going to be a little bit of a hodgepodge, if you will. We're going to talk about a lot of different tools that are involved in development with regards to Node.js and more specifically towards IBM. So, a quick overview of the things we're going to do. We're going to talk about exactly what you would think we would talk about when we want to talk about development tools. We're going to talk about editors. We're going to talk about debugging. We're going to talk about source control management with Git, and we're also going to talk a little bit at the end about a free offering that we have called Node Run that can simplify being able to get started with Node.js development. So, of course, we won't be able to take any deep dives on any of these individual topics just because of the amount of time we have to work with here. So again, as Amanda mentioned, if you have questions, feel free to ask them through the GoToMeeting interface. And I'm going to try to leave at least 10 minutes, maybe a little more at the end of the webinar to answer some of your questions here within the broadcast. But again, do remember, we'll answer all of the questions and send out a transcript of the questions and answers here in a few days after the webinar is over. So ultimately, you're here because for one reason or another, you're interested in Node.js development. Well, Node.js development is extremely important to Profound Logic as well. We've jumped into this pool with both feet. This is really where we see the future. Now, if you're still new to the idea of Node.js and IBM and how that fits in, and you didn't attend our original webinar, Scott Clement, our director of development and support, did a great webinar about a month ago, or 2 months ago, I guess, on the world of Node.js on IBM. So if you haven't seen that webinar, take the time, go back and watch it. And it gives you a really good overview of the entire Node.js ecosystem and how that relates to IBM. So I mentioned that we here at Profound are really focused on the Node.js ecosystem, and the fact that IBM has brought Node.js to IBM is really a great opportunity in our opinion. So, we've got tooling that we've built around the Node.js ecosystem. And, one thing that I wanted to point out is not only do we have our tools in the Node.js realm, we've also taken what I think is a great next step, and that is we're a member of the OpenJS Foundation. Now, originally it was the Node.js Foundation, and OpenJS and the Node.js Foundation merged, and so now it's all under the OpenJS Foundation umbrella. But we as a company have joined the foundation. We invest our time, our resources, and our money into making sure that Node.js as a whole, not just on IBMI, but as a whole, progresses. It also allows us to have a little bit of voice in decisions that affect Node.js as a whole, and it is we think a really great thing to have a player in the IBMI space be involved in the direction of the Node.js language and ecosystem. So, with all that being said, let's get into really what you came here to talk about, which is development environments. So, Scott's previous webinar talked about, the why Node.js and talked a little bit about, installing Node.js on your IBMI. We're not going to get into all of that. We're going to talk specifically, you've got Node.js on IBMI, or you have Node.js running locally on your machine or on a server in the cloud, wherever it may be. So how do we get started? Well, obviously, the first thing that we're going to think about as developers is we're going to think about, all right, well, what editor am I going to use? Now, there are a lot of editors that you can choose from. I chose 3 to talk about here just because these are the editors that I use and also the ones that make the most sense with regards to Node.js development in relation to IBMI. So the first one we'll talk about is the one that I assume that most of you are IBMI developers. You came here to learn about developing Node.js, so chances are you are familiar with Rational Developer for I. This is IBM's development platform for all of your ILE languages, your RPG, your COBOL, CL, all of that stuff. You're more than likely doing this in Rational Developer now. It's based on Eclipse. As we all know, it's not free. So if your company's already invested in it, you already have it, you can edit Node.js code in Rational Developer. It should be a very familiar environment to you if you're already doing RPG development. It's great at ILE development, and IBM hasn't made, that I'm aware of or that I've seen, major investment in Rational Developer for Node.js development, but it is a serviceable editor for doing changes to Node.js. So first thing we're going to do is we're just going to jump in. I'll show you how it works, how to go about it. It's really pretty simple. So let's hop into Rational Developer. So this should be very familiar to you. This is where we live as ILE developers. So you'll notice here, I forgot to shut down an RPG source member I had open here. So as you can see, we've got some RPG code here. Now, if I wanted to make some changes to a Node.js application, it's very easy to do. Node.js that's running on IBMI exists in the IFS. So I can easily come down to my IFS options here in the Remote Systems Explorer and just drill down to what I'm looking for. So I've actually got a filter that's pointing to one of my Node.js servers. We get down into it. And so here's, a JavaScript file. So this is a Node.js file for me. I can open that up. And it will open it right here in the editor. As you can see, it's going to do some color coding for me a little bit. The outline is going to give me a little bit of extra information so that I can jump around in the source. But I can come here and I can edit and I can save my work. Functionality wise, that's most of what's here. I think from what I've seen is the JavaScript editor is here in Rational Developer because it's based on Eclipse and it was already there. So will it work? Absolutely. Do I use it every day? No, I don't. Honestly, the only reason I ever make any node changes in Rational Developer, it would be if I'm already in Rational Developer working on some ILE work. Let's say I had a Node.js script that is calling an RPG program. And let's say I'm making changes to that RPG program and maybe I changed the prototype so the interface has changed a little bit. Instead of firing up another editor and dealing with all that, sometimes I'll just hop right here in Rational Developer, open up my node file and make the appropriate changes so that the interface is the same and save it. I don't do any heavy duty developing in Rational Developer as far as my Node.js is concerned. So that's Rational Developer as far as Node.js is concerned. It has an editor. It does do some small syntax checking, and it also does, color coding and those types of things. But I just don't find it to be a good tool for a lot of heavy development in Node.js. So, but it is an option, and it's an option that many IBMI shops have already. So the second editor we're going to talk about is Visual Studio Code. Now, Visual Studio Code is where I do a lot of developing, actually. I do a lot of development for Node.js for examples for customers and those types of things. I'm not involved in our product dev staff, so they do a lot more, development closer to the metal than I do. The development I do is more like what our customers would do. And so I do a lot of development in Visual Studio Code because I'm doing development that may be on IBMI, but it also may be on a Linux server. So, in the cloud or locally, I may be developing things locally on my PC. So I like it as an option because it's very flexible in where I want to edit my code. So we have some people that instantly don't like the idea of Visual Studio Code because it's a Microsoft product. But please keep in mind, Microsoft has been very open to open source in the recent years. Visual Studio Code is a completely free and open source editor. It's actually under the MIT license, which means it can be used for personal or commercial development freely. You don't have to worry about getting in trouble for using it for writing an application that you're going to sell down the road. You can use it for anything, and it is extremely popular. In fact, it is in the Node conferences that I've gone to and all the Node developers that I've interacted with over the last few years, it is by far the most popular editor for Node.js development. And that's not just for developers that are running on Windows machines. That's on Mac, that's on Linux. They all like Visual Studio Code because it is really a good editor. And it can connect to IBMI. I'll show you how that's done and how to set that up. It's very easy to do. Visual Studio Code is extensible, so I actually use a plugin that allows me to use SSH to connect to IBMI. I'll show you how all that's set up. It's pretty simple. So it can absolutely be used for IBMI development of Node.js. It's not good for ILE development. There are plugins out there that can color code and do some syntax checking on RPG code. That does exist. It's in its infancy, to be perfectly honest. And of course, Visual Studio Code can't access our typical source file members. So in order to use Visual Studio Code for any kind of ILE development, all of your code would need to be in the IFS. And while things are moving that way, the IBMI ecosystem really isn't there yet. Just to talk a little bit about the popularity of Visual Studio Code, and there are tons of references out there for different studies that have been done about popularity of editors. I like this particular chart because I think it visualizes it really well. So TripleByte is I guess you'd call them a recruiter. Developers can join TripleByte. They have to go through some testing, and if they're accepted into TripleByte then is more of a matchmaker with big tech companies for placing developers. But they interview developers all day, every day. And what they've done is they've compiled the skill sets of the developers that they've interviewed over the last few years, and they charted out the usage of different editors in their candidates. Now you'll notice back in March of 2017, only 5% of their candidates were using Visual Studio Code. Now if we fast forward to October of 2018, so an 18-month span, it went from 5% to over 20% of their candidates. I believe the exact number is 22%. So the use of Visual Studio Code is definitely on the rise. In fact, I don't have the numbers coming into this year, They haven't published those. I assume they probably will down the road. You can only imagine that this trend will continue. So again, Visual Studio Code is just an extremely popular editor. So let's take a look at it. So I'm going to actually hop into it, and what I'm going to do is we're just going to come in here, and I've got a folder here on my machine called Webinar. I'm just going to right click on that and open that with code, which I think being able to do that on my local machine is just great. And so here we have Visual Studio Code, and we've opened the webinar folder here, and I've got all my code that's here and left on in my Explorer. And of course, my little welcome splash screen, we'll get rid of that. What I like so much about Visual Studio Code is that it has what I need, and it doesn't have all the stuff that I don't need. It's very straightforward. It's designed to get work done. So if we take a look at this, we'll open up an example program here. So let's jump into just jump into our samples here. We're going to play with this Connect 4 game a little later. So let's take a look at the code for that. And here you see we've got our Node.js code open. We can start our development. The editor is very easy to use. It has IntelliSense, so it's going to help you along as much as it can as we go through this. And of course, then you save your work back to your files. It has integration for Git. We'll get into that as well. But overall, it's just a really nice editor to use. I can't spend too much time taking you through all the ins and outs of it, but it's free. All you got to do is download it and install it, kick the tire, see what you think. So in order to access remote systems, what I do, and there are different ways to go about things, but what I do is there's an extension that I use for connecting to my IBMI. So if we go under this little icon here, extensions, we can see the extensions I have enabled here. I have quite a few that I use for different things, but the one that I use the most is Remote SSH. So what I use this for is it gives me the ability to, actually this one, there are two. Microsoft has a new one out now that does not work for IBMI. So it's, but what you can do is you can just come in here and you can search for SSH in your extensions, and it'll show you all the different extensions that are available for using SSH. I use this one here, SSHFS. That's the one that I use. It works really well with IBMI. So you can just come here, find SSHFS, click the install button. Obviously, it's already installed on my machine, and it will set it up. And once it's in there, if I want to connect to a system, all I need to do is, if you haven't connected to a system before, what you would do is you would actually go into the command palette here. You do a lot of things in Visual Studio Code with the command palette. As you can see, these are the things that I've done most recently. If I wanted to create a new connection, I would just type in SSH create, and as you can see, it would point me to this particular one, and it takes me through a little step-by-step dialogue of how are we going to connect to this system. Now, obviously, my system's already configured, so I'm not going to do that again. But what I can do is I can come down here. Power 8 is what we internally call our IBMI. So I can edit that configuration right here. And as you can see, these are all the settings that I would have gone through in that dialog. And basically all I need to do is just give it a name, tell it the host and port that I'm going to use, the root, so where on the IFS do I want to connect to? So you can connect to root. As you can see, I have one called Power 8 root. I don't always want to do that because there's a ton of stuff out there in the IFS. This is actually taking it into my demo instance of my web servers and Node.js servers on our particular box. I can put in my username, and I have this set to prompt for a password. You actually can hard code your password in here, or you can use a private key this is SSH, so if you have a private key that's set up that you can use to access your box, you can put that there and then you don't have to log in at all. But just basic settings, just tell the plugin how we're going to access the IBMI. And once we have that, then I can come down here and we'll just do it as an example. So Power 8, I will connect that as a workspace folder. It's going to ask for my password, so let me type that in. And here we are. So it has now, I'll minimize my webinar folder that's local. As you can see, I have this, the Power 8 has the little green logo next to it, letting me know that it connected successfully. And here and under my my workspace here, you'll see I now have a folder SSHFS for Power 8, and I can come in here and now I'm browsing the code on my IBMI, and I can edit it just like I can local code. If I jump into that same program we were looking at earlier, just to have an apples to apples comparison here, I can open that up right here, and as you can see, here's my code. Now, by default, Visual Studio Code uses this dark theme. I'm a fan of dark editor themes. It's just easier on the eyes for me. But if you don't like that, everything in Visual Studio Code is configurable. So you can hop right here to this little sprocket at the bottom, and you can choose, whatever color theme you like. I use the dark default here. If you like light, you can do that. This gets tiring on my eyes after a while, so I generally stick with the darker themes on all my applications. But again, find whatever works for you, whatever makes you comfortable. So that's a quick overview of Visual Studio Code. We won't get any deeper than that, just because we don't have a ton of time. So the last editor I want to show you is actually ours. So you may have heard we have a product called Profound.js. I'm not trying to sell you products, so everything we're going to talk about today that has to do with our products is all free. So not trying to sell you licenses for anything, but we do have our Node.js framework. It's called Profound.js. The framework itself is free, and you can install that on your local machine, on your IBMI, whatever you'd like to do. So what I want to do in this particular case is I have Profound.js. Obviously, it's installed on my IBMI as well, but we're going to take a look at it running locally. So let's talk a little bit about that though. So in Profound.js, we have our node designer. It's part of the free framework. You can host it on any platform, including IBMI. So, for our example, we're going to run it locally on my machine here, but I can just as easily open it in the browser for the Profound.js instance that's running on my IBMI. It doesn't have ILE editing at this time, so there's nothing there, so that doesn't really compare with, say, Rational Developer for that. It's just not intended for that. But it is a zero footprint solution. The entire editor runs in the browser, so you don't have to install anything on your PC. Maybe you have, maybe you don't want to install a lot of dev tools on your machine. I mean, this is a valid option. So let me fire up my local Profound.js server. So here I just have this is git bash. This is just a bash shell running on my local laptop here. So I'm just going to start that up. I'm inside my webinar folder, which is a Profound.js folder. So Profound.js is built on top of the Express web server. So that's really what's going on here. Is it's starting up an Express web server in Node. So it's letting me know that it's up and running now. It's running on port 8081. The Node.js version that I'm using, I actually need to update it on this laptop. I just haven't gotten around to it yet. So now it's up and running. So I can hop into my browser here. I actually still have the Node Designer on my IBMI open right now, so here you can see it running. But let's do it from my local host. And we're going to go to localhost 8081 Node Designer. There we are. And so now here we are in our Node Designer session. Go to our file explorer, and as you can see, I'm inside my webinar folder, which is where the Profound.js server is running. And we can go down through any of the folders that we'd like and be able to edit these files. So if we go into our same application we were looking at earlier, here's that connect4.js program. And this, what's interesting about this particular, about the node designer is that we can edit all these languages right here within the editor, but the editor itself, you may notice when you look at it, looks very similar to Visual Studio Code. And there's a reason for that, because we actually use the Monaco editor. Monaco is the editor that Visual Studio Code uses. So the actual editor itself, we're both using the exact same editor. So we, like I said, we all of us here use Visual Studio Code a lot. We really like that editor, so we included the same editor in our own editing tools for our customers. We won't go through, a lot of editing here, but it's important to know that this is here. It's another option. It's free. Again, if you don't want to or can't install a lot of development tools on your PC, you can always, use the Profound.js node designer as your editor and run that on IBMI. Check on how we're doing. Great. So that's editing. We can talk about all the different features and all the different editors, but we'd be here all day. So those are the editor options I would recommend that you take a look at. Visual Studio Code is my favorite. The node designer, I do use the node designer here, especially when I'm doing projects that are Profound.js projects for our customers. Because I'm already in there, I'm using our visual designer to design screens, and it's very easy for me to jump right into the Node.js code all within the same IDE. But if I'm doing more pure node development, I like to do that in Visual Studio Code. Again, the options are completely up to you. So that's some talk about editors. So let's talk a little bit about the one thing that comes up no matter who I talk to who are new to Node.js development that are coming from IBMI. I get these questions every single time. And the questions are, how do we debug? Now I know, that all of you out there write perfect code every time that you write an application. I, on the other hand, do not. So I do need to debug my code from time to time. So how do I go about that? It's actually really simple. And it's one of the reasons I like using Visual Studio Code is because the debugger is built into VS Code. So that is the debugger I use the most often. It can debug locally. It can connect to IBMI and debug IBMI code, however you'd like to do it. But I do really like the debugger in Visual Studio Code. The only downside to doing remote debugging, so if I wanted to debug some code running on IBMI, it's just that I have to have a local copy of the source for it to reference. We're not going to go through all of that right now. I'm going to show you how to set up your debug session. We'll talk about how to connect it to IBMI. We're actually going to run it locally though, just for simplicity's sake. But it's really easy to connect it to IBMI. And we'll talk about how you would go about doing that a little more when we start talking about the Chrome developer tools, because the process would be the same. So with that, let's switch back over, and we have I have my server running right now on 8081. So I'm going to kill that, because when I'm debugging in Visual Studio Code, let me switch back over. Let's say we wanted to debug our little Connect4 application we have here. You can notice I've done this a couple of times as I prepare for the webinar, because you can see I still have a breakpoint set right here within the code itself. So if I want to debug an application in Visual Studio Code, I just go to this little icon that looks like a bug with an X on the back of it, right? When I get here, I have at the top here, I have my different debug configurations. So I can add a new configuration if I want to, or I can launch an existing one. So I've already predefined this session, and I called it, webinar. And if I click on the gear here, you can actually see the configuration file. It's extremely simple. You give it a name, you tell it what to run when you start the debugging session. In this case, we're going to be running a Profound.js application, which is based on Express. So the Express server has to fire up. So we have a file called start.js inside of Profound.js that just starts up the server. You notice that when I was in the shell earlier, I did node start. Start was actually the name of the file to run. So start.js was the file I was actually running, which started the server and got everything up and going. And there's an argument here. This is, because of the way Profound.js is built, we need to use this node no worker argument because just because of the way Express works, and you can have workers that you can have multiple workers running at the same time. So we're just eliminating that so that it's just one server that's only working really just with one client. So we have that. And so if I want to debug this, those are the basic settings. So I click Start Debug. And what you'll notice is down here in the debug console, it's going to fire up my server. You can actually see the command it runs. So it calls node inspect break, just saying that we're going to break immediately. And then the no worker argument that we had is stick on the end. And so now the debugger's listening on that particular port, and and then we get our normal messages from Profound.js, our server version and our Node.js version. So now we're debugging. So I can come back, and we had the Connect 4 application. There was our breakpoint that was set right here on this particular condition. So all I need to do now is run the application. So we'll hop back into the browser, and let's call Connect 4 is in here somewhere. Here we go. And so now it's spinning, right? And you notice that my icon down here for Visual Studio has lit up. So come in and you can see here we are, we're debugging. Now I can step through this code however I'd like to, just like any other debugger. My variables, I have all my values over here. I can see what's scoped inside of the block that I'm currently in. Maybe we want to hit the, I've got a breakpoint set here in the drop function. So let's just let this run. We can flip back to our browser. You can see this is this ships with Profound.js. It's just a simple example of a Connect 4 game. So let's drop it into that column. You'll see that I hit my breakpoint, and we have that. And you'll notice I've got a watch already set on this field called valid move. So as we step through this, I can actually see that value change. Okay, so now it's false. Now the variable view here can be a little daunting because it has all these different scopes. Most of the time you can look here at the local scope. So within the function I'm currently running, these are the 3 variables I have to work with right now. And I can actually keep an eye on them and see what happens to them as we step through the different code. So that's the quick and dirty of debugging in Visual Studio Code. We're not going to get into all the different things. Most debuggers are very similar. You can step over, step into, step out of different functions and statements. I have the ability to pause and to restart the application, or of course to stop. And then I can look at my call stack, all the different things that you would normally be able to do inside of a debugger. But that is debugging in Visual Studio Code. We'll go ahead and kill this for now. And of course, my browser is going to complain because I just killed the server out from under it, which is fine. We can flip back over here, and of course, to our Connect 4 application and continue doing whatever it is we need to do, which is great. It's an easy debugger to do. Now, if I wanted to debug, an IBM application, again, because of time, we're not going to do it, but there's just some extra parameters I would need to set here. Specifically, you can set the port and the host. So basically you would give it, your system name or IP address for your IBM and the port that you want it to actually connect to for the debugger. And then you'll need to set your local path and your remote path so that it knows, where the source is going to be located at, so that it can access the things it needs to access. Again, we're not going to set all that up right now just because we're a little pressed for time. But it works really well. Now, the other debug option that I'm going to show you is using, it's actually using the debugger within Google Chrome. So let me open Chrome real quick, and we'll just leave that where it is because we're just going to run that application again anyway. So if I go into, the development tools for Chrome, and we'll bring that over here so we can see it. Here we are. We've got our normal dev tools. Now, if you do a lot of development in a lot of web development, you've been in the dev tools for Chrome lots of times, I'm sure. This is where you go to debug your client-side JavaScript to figure out, what's happening. What's really cool about it is that you can actually use it to debug your Node.js code as well. So if I were to come back to my my bash shell here, and we're going to start the Node.js server back up again, but you'll notice that I've got here really the same options I had when inside the Visual Studio Code debugger. So -- inspect start, which is that start.js file that ProfoundJS uses to start the server, and then -- no worker. If we do that, and you would do the same thing if you wanted to debug IBMI. So you would go into a SSH session or into Pace, and you would do that exact same command, and that's how you would start. And you would probably want to specify the port, and then that would be how you start up a node session on IBMI that you could debug either from Visual Studio Code or even with the Chrome tools that we're about to use now. Process would be the same. So here we have it. It tells me that the debugger is listening, and it gives me this this URL. Now, when I was preparing this, and actually it's still in our docs because I just realized this, what your process would be that you would copy this URL and paste it into a tab in Chrome, and then that would fire up the Node debugger. But what I found is actually in the latest version of Chrome, they've made a change. Google does that from time to time. And you'll notice now that there's this little green icon. That is the Node.js official logo. It popped up in my DevTools. So if I click on that, that's going to open up the Node.js debugger for me automatically. So if we go to connection here, you'll notice that it is automatically listening on localhost on these two ports, which are very common ports for doing debugging. So it's already listening on those ports. So as soon as I fired up my local server and said, all right, we're with the inspect option, the default port, which is 92229, the DevTools just picked it up. So here we are. And you'll notice I can see in my console here that the same messages that I normally see when the server starts, ProfoundJS server version and Node.js version. So I know we're ready to debug. If I go to my sources, you'll see that I have my sources here. And of course, I've got my file down to my webinar folder, just like I would expect to. So if I now fire this thing back up, you'll see that here we are. My connect4.js file is here. I already had a breakpoint set. So now I can debug through here just like I could for the others. But using Chrome's DevTools, which if you're doing web development, you're probably already familiar with, and you can go through here and do your debugging that way. And what's kind of cool about the Chrome debugger is it works with everything. It doesn't matter what editor you're using, what environment you're running, IBMI, Linux, something out in the cloud. It really doesn't matter. You can use the Chrome developer tools to debug your Node.js, from anywhere. So if you want a consistent debug experience, that's one way to go about it. All right, so we are now going to talk a little bit. That's debugging, the quick and dirty. So let's talk a little bit about something else that comes up with a lot of customers, and that's source control. So they want to talk about Git. So if you're doing Node.js development, Git and GitHub, or some of the other hosts, but GitHub's the big one, right? this is something that you use. Every Node.js developer uses Git for the most part. So first question is what is Git? Well, we can quote the website, which is I like to do because that's the official statement. Is Git is a free and open source distributed version control system designed to handle everything from small to very large projects with speed and efficiency. I'll make Amanda laugh now. That was obviously written by a marketing person. So what does it really mean? It's version control, okay? It is source management. So it's a way for developers to all work on the same source and all of their changes to be managed and merged and packaged and released. All of those things can happen within Git. And Git is the standard within the Node.js community. So I highly recommend that you get to know it. It really is good. How do you use it? Well, you can use it from a command line. That's what a lot of people that have been doing node development for a really long time do, is they do it from the command line. But all the editors that we talked about today also have Git support built in. So you can, we'll take a quick look at those, but we don't have a ton of time left. And of course, there are online guides everywhere about using Git. If you want the official guide, if you will, actually gitscm.com, which is the official Git website. You can go to that/book, and that will give you a free ebook that is supposed to be everything you ever wanted to know about Git, and it's completely free. Otherwise, Google's your friend. I Google things about Git all the time. There are lots of commands that I don't use all the time that it's just easier for me to Google and figure out what I want to use. So the other thing about Git's for managing the source, but the other thing you have to do is you have to have a repo, which means you have to have somewhere to host that repo. There are a lot of different options. This is a list of just a few. You can host it yourself. There's GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket. There's tons that are out there. We're going to concentrate on GitHub because that is the big one. That's the most commonly used one, and we're just going to briefly talk about it. So. And we'll see, how to use Git with some of the tools that we've talked about today as well. So like I said, GitHub is the most widely used. It has integration with tons of tools. It's got a lot of added features that are really nice, things like issue tracking, wiki for your documentation. There's some project management functions in there as well. And one of the things that's really cool is the automation and continuous integration. So there are what they call webhooks that you can build into a repo in GitHub, and then you can automate things so that when you make a commit, you can make it automatically do some automated testing, or you can build out a release when the commit hits, or deploy to another server somewhere whenever a commit is pushed back up to the repo. So a lot of really cool things you can do that make continuous integration easier. So how do you get started? Well, one of the things that I recommend actually is you can start with, GitHub has something called GitHub Desktop. It is a very simple GUI interface for dealing with Git. I've been using Git for a while. I still use GitHub Desktop for a lot of things. So I can actually pull that up here. And so we can see the repositories I have here on my machine. This is the trivia app that we're going to take a look at in a minute. I can see as you can see, it's just, I've got some commits that I've made recently. But what's really great here is that I don't have to know all the commands to make this. When I want to fetch, the latest, I just click up here where it says fetch origin. If I were working with multiple branches, I can manage them right here on this drop down. Take a look at different repositories. So this is, common conference app that that one of my interns is actually working on. I can go back here, and this is actually really useful for me as a manager. I haven't written a single line of code for this particular application, but I need to keep up with what's going on. So I can actually just use the desktop here to go back through and take a look at all the different commits that have happened. And I can see the changes. Red's obviously things that were deleted, and green's things that were added. So I can come back and I can go through any of these individual files and figure out, in this case, Caitlin committed this 5 days ago, and these are all the things that she committed. So, as a manager, I can see what's changing. I can see how much work's getting done. It's really useful for, for me, even though I do know how to use the command line or other tools to deal with Git. We're not going to get into command line usage. Just that's something you can learn. It's not very hard. But I do want to hop back into some of our editors. For example, Visual Studio Code. This Node Webinar Trivia is actually an application that I have loaded here locally. It is part of a Git repo though. So we can actually come in here and let's go to this trivia.js file. So the first thing I can do is I can show you is I can select a line of code here, so line 12. And if I look at the bottom here, it tells me that, all right, well, we're on the master branch in Git. And this is my favorite feature is Git blame. So this line was last changed by me 1 day ago. So if something's not working right that was working 2 days ago, you can go back through the code and hit a line of code and it'll tell you who changed it and when. If I need to get any deeper than that, I can click on that and it'll actually give me the option to open up GitHub and show me the exact commits and exactly who did what, when, and where, which is actually really useful. If I make a change, let's just add a comment here. So we'll do a VS Code comment. Here we go. Save that change. You'll notice here this little icon with a fork. That is our source control tab. So we've got different things that are I've got several apps here that actually have source control on them, but specifically we're looking at Node Webinar. You can see here, this is the change that I made. I can actually open up and see the before and after. And from here, I can then choose to stage commit. We could commit this. Yes, I want to commit it. We'll give it a commit message. We'll say VS Code test 2. There we go. And that's actually going to commit that to my repo. And then, from there, I can actually pull, any of the commit things that I need to do. So in this case, we're just going to push that back up to our repo running out in GitHub. So now that change has been pushed up to my repository. We also have integration for GitHub in our Profound.js Node Designer, so that's there as well. We won't go too far into it because we're actually going to look at that now because I want to make sure I have some time to talk to you about Node Run. So we've talked about a lot of tools today, a lot of different editors and tools for Git and debugging and all of those things, and it does take a little work to get all of that set up. So what we've done here at Profound Logic is we've created a free service. We call it Node Run. So if I just hop into it, Node Run is 100% free. You can have unlimited public and private spaces that you can do development. What you get when you create a space is you get your own private little Linux server is actually what it is. It's a micro instance of Linux. And we've set up the Express server. We have our UI and our Profound.js frameworks that are already set up and running there. You can use them or you can choose not to. You don't have to. But it is a full stack runtime. That instance gets its own database instance, MariaDB instance, so that you can do database access. It has the full featured IDE that we have, the Node Designer from Profound.js, plus more on top of that. So it has access to the command line, visual interfaces for Git. It has it all prepackaged, so that if you want to get into Node development, you can just start coding. So if we take a look at that, let's hop into noderun.com, and I'm just going to go ahead and maximize this at this point. So this is noderun.com. I already have an account and I'm logged in, as you can see. I can take a look at my projects that I have here. I can start a new space if I want to. So if I click there, it will open up an IDE. You're going to see that it looks a lot like the one from Profound.js with some extra features. I can choose some templates, choose a template that I want to start with if I'm brand new to this and I don't know exactly what I want to do. or I can clone a Git repo. That's actually what I'm going to do in this case. So here we are. My Node Run account's already been linked to my GitHub account, so I have a list of all the repos I have access to in GitHub. So let's do this Node webinar trivia example. So I say, all right, well, that's what I want, and it's going to ask me, all right, well, do you want to keep the Git repository in sync with GitHub, which is a really cool. That's using GitHub's webhooks. So let's do that. So there we go. Now, as you can see, I have my application. Everything's here and ready to go. I just need to, in this case, I need to set trivia as go to my properties. That is my app start file. So that's my app. And we can, of course, get into the code if we want to. There's that VS Code comment we added earlier. We can launch this. This is actually a really fun little app. It was actually written by Al Lesher, one of my solutions architects. And we can launch that in a browser over here. And as you can see, there we go. You can actually, it's using a cloud-based trivia database to come up with questions. So Enter the Dragon was Bruce Lee, for example. And so it takes you through, I think, 10 questions and then tells you how you scored and shows you the correct answers to the questions. So it's something fun to play with. And of course, in Node Run, you can come here and you can take a look and you can find this app. For example, it's listed here under Fun and Games. You can take a look at it. You can work with the code. You can fork it, which means you can get your own copy of it in your own workspace, and then you can go and play with it, make changes, and do whatever you'd like to do with it. So it's a good place to come and have a little fun. But I mentioned that we had all the same. Again, it's the Monaco editor, just like the normal Node designer. There's also a social aspect to it, so you can actually comment on workspaces and share them via social media. If we go over here, you'll see you have a database tab. You actually have, we can create our own tables here so that we can have data for our application to access. There's also the Git tab, which is a lot of fun. So if I come in here and make another change, and let's just say Node Run comment. There we go. And we'll save that. So now we will, now we've saved that. So now we should see a difference here in our Git. So now that it was set to be synced, we can view the status. There we go. We have a change that's not staged for commit, and let me run this back down because I can't see. There we go. So I got my list of changes. So here's my unstaged change. I can double click on it, and again, I can see the difference for what I've done. I can from there be able to come in and stage those changes, commit them, whatever it is I'd like to do, and then push those back out to my repo. Now I took that option, the GitHub sync, right? And you see it's checked here. So just for fun, let's go, and I'm gonna go back into Visual Studio because again, I have this repo also on my local machine. And I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna change this to say, oh, well, I'm not in the right, there we go. I can come in and add another comment and say, GitHub sync is cool. There we go, let's save it. And let's come back in. And again, we're gonna take that change and we are going to give it a name, and we're gonna go ahead and commit that. Yes, I wanna commit it. And we will go ahead and push that up to the server. And if we come back over to our Node Run instance, we will see that change come through, provided my push was successful. Which it should have been. So switch back. And that may be because I don't have, I'm gonna discard that change. There we go. There we go. So now it's telling me, oh, by the way, that file's been modified you want to reload it. So if we do, we'll see that it has, or it should. Let's do a pull then. Here we go. GitHub sync is cool. I think it's because I had an unstaged change that it didn't automatically pull. But what it does is that we can do it again. We'll go through that process one more time just so that we can see it work. So let's save that. We've got our change, test2, commit, and then we will push that to the server. And now when we come in, here we go. Up, workspace file, trivia.js has changed. And then you can see it automatically loaded that change. So that is the quick overview of the tools that I like to use. We've actually run a little longer than I intended, so we're not going to have a ton of time for questions, but I want to make sure that we spend some time. So next steps, try all the tools we've talked about. Go and try Node Run. You can go to noderun.com. It's completely free, and you can kick the tires there and get it and play with those tools as much as you'd like. Again, look for an email after here in the next few days with a link to watch this webinar again on demand. And be sure to complete that survey. We do actually use that feedback to plan the things that we have coming up in the future. So with that, I am going to flip over and take a look at the questions that we have.
And if you haven't submitted a question yet, you can go ahead and do that using the questions tab in GoToWebinar. You'll also have the opportunity to ask questions in the survey that you'll be prompted to take after the webinar. But we do have a few minutes, so if you want Brian to answer any of your questions, you can submit those right now. Brian, was there anything that you didn't get a chance to cover that you'd like to try to cover real quick?
Yeah, we can, if there are no questions, which I'm going to take to mean that I did an amazing job at showing all of the features, is we can actually get a little more into the get functionality within the Profound.js Node Designer or in Node Run as well. Again, we can make these changes here, and as I mentioned, all of that get integration is built in. So we have our unstaged changes. We can stage those. We can push those out to our repo, all just point and click our way through it. Again, you don't have to be an expert in all the individual commands to be able to run those. Also in Node Run, you can debug in Node Run. To debug inside of Node Run, you would actually use the Chrome debugger like we did earlier. So if I come into my server, for example, and choose to start debug, it will actually fire up an app server running inside of Node Run, and it will give me that URL that Chrome needs. So I can actually just copy this in, and then I can go into Chrome and, well, I was already in Chrome. I can open a Chrome tab and paste that in, and it will take me into the Chrome debugger, but have it attached to my actual Node Run session. And from there, I can get started with my debugging. All right, looks like we did get a few questions. So let's see. So one, can we see a launch.json that is set up for IBM host and port connection, or where to find the required settings? So actually, the required settings for that is actually in Scott's first webinar. He actually had a slide where he showed the exact settings for that. But I don't have one on this machine to show you right this second. But actually what I can do, if you would like, is I can actually get a copy of the settings that would be in that file, and I can send that in the questions transcript so that you can have that going forward. All right, next question. On IBMI, when a node job is running, I see a job is submitted in the background. How can we change that job? I mean, submit with different users, etc. So Node is running inside of Pace, which is going to be a really different animal. So you're not going to be able to just do the normal work management that we do with, you know, say a web server job. So I'll actually have to refer back to some of my dev team on this because I don't even know how you would change the user profile, etc. for that. Generally, when you start the Node.js application, it's going to run under whatever job started the Node.js app, whether that be a Node.js server or just, you know, running a Node script. Where can we find the webinar link for the first webinar? We can definitely send that out to you in the email, but the easiest way to do that is to actually go to our website. So if you go over to profoundlogic.com and take a look in education, you can find the on-demand webinars and videos link, and inside of there is Scott's last webinar. And once the video is ready for this, you'll be able to find this one there as well. So with that, we are at the top of the hour. So we will go ahead and get this wrapped up. If there are any other questions, feel free to put them in really quick, and we'll try to answer those in the transcript, or you can put those in. I believe Amanda said there's a place in the post-webinar survey for additional questions.
Absolutely. And you can always reach out to us too via the website if you have any questions for our team. But thanks everyone for attending, and thank you, Brian, again for taking the time to cover these topics with us. And I hope everyone has a great day.